Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second and final lecture for the week. Most likely, I may have put a third one in this week, but I don't think so. Probably just going to leave it with just talking about children and adolescents and aging in sport and exercise for exercise physiology. Again, 406. Chapter 18, talking about today. That'll comprise the information you need for your discussion board post for this week. And then we'll get into more with differences in males and females and other exercise prescription for next week and week 13 of our total of 16 weeks. That being said, talking about aging and exercise. First and foremost, loss of height can begin between ages 35 and 40 years old. I was 6 feet tall. I did a measurement of myself a couple months ago, and I stood as tall as I possibly could. And of course, measuring yourself early in the morning is a better idea, and it was more mid-late morning. And actually, I haven't measured myself first thing in the morning because I don't really have a way of measuring myself set up specifically at home, although I could. I haven't done it to see if there's any difference there. But I found myself to be just barely under 5'11", which was I was not very happy about that. So I've lost some height. Some of that has to do with compressed discs over time. Some of that could do with lack of flexibility, lack of doing exercises that keep you more upright and elongated. Some people will urge you to be on a board where you hang upside down, right? And I think that's questionable how much it's really going to play a huge role. Hey, if you're into that kind of thing, you certainly can do it. That being said, it's not the end of the world either that you lost a little bit of height by itself. So a loss of height can begin between 35 to 40 years old. You can expect that might be a possibility where height will start to go. And that being said, that something you call creep, you can help avoid some of that by not having yourself in positions where you're in postures where you are rounded forward and clearly losing height, where you at least, arguably, at least during the day, the recommendation is every 30 minutes or so, find a moment to kind of be upright, work on posture, kind of stand up, move, open up your shoulders and actually rotate your shoulders and retract shoulder blades back and depress your shoulders. Do all the things the opposite of what you typically do. When you're sitting in a chair, the tendency is your forward head goes forward into kind of a protracted forward head position. So you need to be kind of more retracted. Of course, going to be more flexed spine. We're trying to be more neutral, kind of going into extension from flexed, but ultimately neutral spine, right? Same with shoulders, tend to be more rounded forward into protraction, trying to get them to retract and back toward neutral position, a little more internal rotation for your shoulders, trying to get them more into external rotation. All those kinds of things can play a role. So exercises that work on posture can help with that, and actually not putting unnecessary stress on the spine for compression of the discs. It's natural, your discs like compressive forces. They're made to handle compressive forces. However, like all things, it doesn't mean you want to be in a seated position, one of the worst positions to be in, if not the worst, so to speak, for your spine's sake on a regular basis. You want to be moving as much as possible and standing as much as possible. To be clear, standing still has its own set of challenges and issues, more with the feet as opposed to the spine necessarily. For being on your feet all day long, all the blood going toward venous pooling and kind of going toward your feet, and actually feel a lot of pressure there. A lot of people have issues with achy feet when they stand all day in a job. So standing desks are not the answer to all things. It actually would be ideal to be having some time to sit, some time to stand in your course of your day. Clearly having time for exercise, but also having time for relaxing and taking stress off. You need to have both. You can't have just one. Osteopenia versus osteoporosis. Osteopenia is basically a reduction in bone mineral density. So it's a precursor toward osteoporosis. You're going to have that first. Now, in talk about osteoporosis, which is severe loss of bone mass, your text actually notes genetics and poor diet playing a role, or maybe even the greatest role for the text's perspective for osteopenia, and then towards osteoporosis. That being said, to be really clear, exercise is going to have the greatest impact there, far and away. You can eat all you want properly, have good genetics, and be sitting in bad positions all day long. You're going to have problems. Now, you could actually exercise really, really well, but have poor genetics, and that can play a role too. Absolutely. Just like having a poor diet, it's not going to be supportive of your exercise program. Absolutely. But without the exercise, specifically the compressive force exercise, where you have walking, jogging, jumping, lunging, squatting, deadlifting, overhead pressing, chest pressing, all sorts of compressive force activities where you have a load, or you're doing activities that when you land in line with gravity, you have compressive forces. Arm curls, pulling exercises, Nope. Swimming, cycling, nope. Okay, cycling, you argue, is a very light touch where you're pushing down on the pedal, just a very, very light amount, but nothing to any significant extent. You need to be on land and doing work on land with compressive force activities to really build bone density over time. That's true for children, it's true for adults, true for older adults. You can gain back some of what you lost. How much is unknown. How much you really can get back what you lost. That being said, don't stop exercising. You don't have to worry about it quite so much. You'll lose some, but not nearly as much. There's no question about that. And bone builds outward. So the more you get compressive forces down through a bone, not across. The reason why you don't get from distraction forces or pulling forces bone density increase, because the load is actually going across the joint, so consequently it's not helping with load through the joint. And when you do perform compressive force joint activities, you get load through those joints, through those bones. Weight gain is pretty common for people as we get older. It's no question I'm significantly bigger than I was. I'm going to credit most likely the culprit, I should say, to be less exercise than I used to engage on a regular basis. No question about it. And eating more than I probably did, at least from a standpoint on those days when I wasn't doing as much. There's no question about it. When I was engaging in significant exercise, I eat far more than I eat now, although I eat cleaner than I do now. That's for sure. But typically, weight gain begins between ages 25 to 45, broad there, sure, but bigger changes occur in those time frames due primarily to decrease in activity. That's the biggest thing. Secondarily to poor diet. I've alluded to it a little bit before, but it never ceases to amaze me how much there is in the media that the diet's the greatest impact. Well, if you stop eating, you certainly won't have as much size. You'll be mostly fat. You'll have a high body fat percentage, but you'll be low as far as body weight, body mass. If you don't eat enough, and you'll have no metabolism. You'll have very poor hormonal responses. You'll have no immunity. There's some major health problems are coming your way. That makes absolutely no sense. But yeah, you can be thin, but not necessarily lean. There's a difference. Okay, you can be thin, we call skinny fat, right? Without being necessarily lean. That's not a good thing. Exercise is the key there, improving metabolic rate, right? So exercise is the key factor, the key primary factor, and of course your diet supports that. Having a solid diet is important too. I don't know if I talked about with this class. I had two friends of mine that were personal trainers about 15 years ago. They did a video. One gentleman was on the treadmill running along, kind of jogging, and the other guy has pizza in his hand. And Kenny had pizza in his hand. Jeremy was on the treadmill. And Kenny's eating pizza and goes, "Jeremy, how many calories you burned there on the treadmill?" And Jeremy looks at the treadmill and says, 150 calories. And Kenny goes, "This pizza is 400 calories. And he eats the pizza. And a few minutes later, he goes, "Jeremy, how many calories you burned there running?" He's done. "Now I'm burning at 205 or 300 or whatever he was. It wasn't 300 calories. It was 200 some odd calories. And now Kenny's on his second pizza. He goes, "That's another 400 calories. You can't out cardio a bad diet." Like, it's a pretty cool little message that, yeah, no matter what you do, if you eat horribly poorly, you're not going to be able to support what you do with exercise. There's always a balance there. But the only thing, we've said this before, the only thing that increases the metabolism, only thing, okay, is activity, moving. It shouldn't be surprising at all, because skeletal muscles being used, you could argue, of course, metabolically, of course, using your brain has to some extent some level of metabolic improvement or regulation as well. So certainly the harder you think and the harder you work mentally has some effect there. But unless you use your body, you're not going to have anywhere near the same metabolic rate or the same benefit toward avoiding unnecessary weight gain, other than the gain of muscle, hopefully, and some fat that goes with that muscle, intramuscular fat, which is unavoidable, as we said before, because of exercise. Weight tends to stabilize for 10 to 15 years after age 45, okay, before losses of bone and muscle mass begin at age 55 to 60. Again, that's more on average. All these numbers are on average. So they can be attenuated, meaning it can be significantly reduced, okay, with proper exercise and proper diet, proper overall care, exercise being number one component of that. And if I didn't say it before, and I think that I did, the four primary factors we're always talking about for overall well-being, improving your strength, improving your what benefits you, for example, metabolic rate, hormonal development, nervous system development, skeletal muscle adaptation, all of that, the cardiorespiratory benefits, all those things. Your exercise, number one. Nutrition, arguably number two, but right in there. Sleep, you'd argue for some people it's number one. There's always that. There's always possibility for some people things are more important than others, but you can't have one of those missing and reach ideal levels of overall well-being. And the last one is the last one, 4 of 4, is your life stress. What's going on in your life? Is your life really stressful? Well, let's be really clear. Like right now with COVID-19, people have their fear of COVID-19, the fact they have to be socially distancing themselves, so consequently you're lacking the social, interpersonal communication with people in the same way. You don't talk to people. That whole feeling of togetherness, that feeling of affection toward people who you really care about, other than the people in your immediate family you get to see, everybody else you don't. That takes away a lot of our health and well-being. It does. There's no way around it. So the best thing we can do is control the controllables. The social and personal part we can't do anything about. Some of the life stress is there. It's going to be there. Some of the stress and concern about the future, what might hold. We have a lot of speculation. We don't really know a lot of things. We know some things, but we don't really know exactly when we're going to be in a situation where it's a-okay to be normal once again, like we were 4, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago. Okay. That being said, that's life stress. So your diet playing a role, no question about it, and sleep playing a big role, exercise playing a big role too. What you really have, in my opinion, is 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. That's the 100% of you, from a standpoint of the primary factors anyway, that affect your well-being. If you can't get maximal scores on all 4, you can't reach athletic performance standard levels. You need to be thinking about just being healthy and looking at light levels. I know my score is about like 60 something if I tally up a 25% for each one of those categories. Something to think about. And that's going to be more likely then you're going to see some of these negative responses coming with age if you're not overall taking care of yourself in multiple facets. Exercise being number 1, but all 4 of those things. Sarcopenia, loss of muscle mass with aging, loss in both number of fibers and a loss in size of those fibers. Okay. Less cross bridges, less the actin myosin cross bridges. Consequently, with that loss of muscle mass, begins about 40 years of age, right around there. It's greater in men than in women, which is not surprising because men had more muscle mass on average, or have more muscle mass on average than women due to testosterone differences, right? Genetic differences, generally speaking. And of course, the more you exercise regularly, the more you increase testosterone, so that can be attenuated to some extent, both in terms of avoiding the loss, as well as make up for it by increasing your testosterone levels naturally to whatever level you're reasonably able to achieve, which we don't know until you've exercised it, no pun intended there. Typically, it's about 1% muscle mass loss on average for every year after 40. Average. Doesn't mean you're absolutely going to lose 1%. Could be losing more than 1%. Could be a minuscule component of 1% if you're engaging in regular exercise. Again, I'm 49. I'm not terribly active, but I get in a little bit of something almost every day. Certainly 4 or 5 days a week, I'm doing something of some reasonable level of activity. I'm not always getting it in, but I try to get 15, 20, 25 minutes of cardiovascular work and 1 or 2 sets of variable strength exercises at least once or twice during the week. That's my primary goal. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But if I can keep that going, as I have been, then I don't lose a lot. I lose some, but I don't lose a lot. Luckily, I can still do a lot of things, and I think some of that has to do with the activity, some has to do with genetics, but we can't control the genetics, we can only control the activity. So whoever we're talking about, don't stop being active, right? Otherwise, nervous system response differences as we age and get older. There's a substantial decrease in the capacity to process information and activate muscles. Your central nervous system doesn't function the same level then communicating with the peripheral nervous system to be able to perform basic actions as far as coordination, movement skill, which again we said is the primary thing that goes first when you're fatiguing. It's also one of the things that goes significantly as you age, no question about it, right? In terms of how fast you can fire, the firing rate of muscle fibers, as well as flexibility, mobility, all those things, overall skill and movement. Part of it's because just poor communication nervous system to skeletal muscle, and part of that is because you're just not using those muscles, and so therefore you've not exercised that communication system between the nervous system. The proper neurons firing the right muscle fibers at the right time in the right sequence hasn't occurred often enough to attenuate the decline. Aging seems to affect the ability to detect a stimulus and produce a response, which slows both simple and complex movements. Again, that's at lower firing and twitch rates. Not good. If we're not using those exercises and engaging in regular activity, we lose it. And that's why you'll hear some people say sprint twice a week. Have you heard that one before? I hesitate to say sprint twice a week. That's a lot to say to somebody. Go as hard as you can go 2 days out of the week? No, but you'd be running strides and doing something like whatever you call running, whatever's running for you, as fast as you go without being injurious to you, with good form. Yes, those are good things to be thinking about. Comparisons with younger individuals. There's more capillaries per unit area of muscle mass in a trained versus older and young adults. It's the same. Okay, for capillaries per unit area of muscle mass. Okay, whether you're trained and you're older and young. That said, maximal strength in many cases is relatively retained in older years. That's the good news. It's the cardiovascular difference that capillaries, although they're the same in trained for older and young adults, there's a substantial difference between those who are trained and not trained. You will lose capillaries per unit of area of muscle mass if you're not using those muscles very specifically from an aerobic standpoint. So we're talking about that gas exchange, the capillaries, or I should say where all exchange occurs there for gas exchange there at that capillary level with the muscle fibers. Okay. Is maximal strength slow or fast? From a general standpoint, for maximal strength, we're talking about slow. You cannot maximally generate force, internal force, fast. Okay, can't. Not maximal. Can it be fast? Can it be powerful? Sure. But when you explode to jump, or when you explode to sprint, or you explode to throw a punch or a kick, anything like that, your initiation of the motion there had a very powerful little moment right there where that occurred. Okay, little synapses firing right there to get the right neurons to fire, to get the right muscle fibers to fire in the right sequence at the right time, give you significant force right there. But like the impact right there, I hit my hand there. What a lot of that was the momentum carried over the initiation of the response. It wasn't like I had a tremendous amount of force, the entire motion itself, into hitting into my hand there. Now, if I do it really slowly and push really, really hard, I can generate a whole lot more force than if I hit my hand pretty hard there. Hit it really hard with fast, it's a lot harder if I keep my other hand there. If I push slow enough and hard, piece of cake. Okay, moving that hand, there's no question about it. So much more force can be generated when you move slow. So if you want maximal strength, that is the primary goal, slower motion. Partly because you really don't have a choice. If you're actually engaging higher loads, you're not going to be able to move fast. It's not possible. And by the way, those strength of connective tissue, ligaments, the ligamentous and tendinous junctions there at the bone, the entheses there, where those connections are made, they will get stronger with the higher loads or higher force outputs at slower speeds. So although we want higher speeds from the standpoint of performance, from the standpoint of connective tissue wellness or well-being and strength, and they can grow to some extent, but very limited capacity. Cartilage cannot, but the connective tissue can to some extent. We have to be engaging in slow motions at higher loads. Okay. The cardiovascular and respiratory function, there's a decrease in the maximal heart rate. Tanaka formula is a lot more accurate. You'll see it between sometimes it'll say 207, sometimes it says 208. It's actually rounded up to 208. Okay, it's like 207.6, 207.7. That's why it says 208 sometimes it says 207. Difference of 1 is not going to make any difference. Minus 0.7 times your age. In my case, 49 times 0.7, which is really about 34. 34 from 208, you're basically looking at 174. Okay. Now, if I did the old school 220 minus my age, I would actually get 171. So 174 by the Tanaka formula and the 220 minus your age formula, I'm at 171. The difference of 3 beats. It's actually not that big of a deal. And when you get someone more in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the difference between this Tanaka formula and 220 minus your age is substantial. Likewise, using that Tanaka formula for someone who's like 5 years old, my daughter's 4, there's a huge difference in 220 minus your age, which is 220 minus 4 is 216, versus her age, which is 4 times 0.7, which is 2.8 from 208, 205 versus 216. That's 11 beats. That's a substantial difference. That's why we suggest for people who are under 18 or 18 and under and 40 and older to be using the Tanaka formula. And if you're basically 18 to 39 years of age, using the 220 minus your age is probably more accurate. Is it exactly correct? No. But as we said, you get a decrease in maximal heart rate as you age, simply because due to age, your body can't handle the same level of stress from the standpoint of heart rate. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't have the same force output, although we expect some loss with aging. Not being able to get your heart rate to as high of a level is not a bad thing in general. There's nothing to be overly concerned about that by itself. Just because someone gets a higher heart rate does not mean they have a higher performance. If you run against a small child, they'll have a very high heart rate relative to you trying to keep up with you, most likelihood, if you're 5, 6, 7 years old. But they might not be as fast as you or as strong as you. So max heart rate is not something you need to be overly worried about. But we've got to know it's going to be going down. And we should expect to see someone's heart rate to be lower at the same level of output or effort, perceived effort, rate, RPE, versus output, which is heart rate, are going to be declining, okay, in terms of heart rate response. And that's typically due to changes in the sinoatrial node, SA node, for that, basically affecting the rhythm of your heart and the heartbeat, and it slows cardiac conduction. So consequently, you don't have as fast of a rate, which isn't necessarily, again, a bad thing. Maximal stroke volume, though, is reduced around 10-20% every decade. Basically, it can be 20% plus by the time you get to 60, 70 years old, easily, by after age about 40. Typically speaking, it's really also going to go down that much easily. To be really clear, it'll go down 10-20%. You take a month or two off from cardiovascular exercise. It'll go down 10%. You take 2 to 3 weeks off. So really, that's not terribly unusual for anyone that doesn't regularly engage in cardiovascular exercise. And we've said it many times before, you're able to hold your maximal strength, some of your muscle mass, fairly well, even despite taking days, weeks, and even some months off. But the cardiovascular capacity for the gas exchange and the recognition at the from the capillary level and the alveoli and their relationship, and actually having a lower stroke volume, higher stroke volume, and hopefully then, of course, consequently, if you have a higher stroke volume, you have lower heart rates at the same level of activity. You'll have increased cardiac output, or more than likely maintaining it. Cardiac output is going to be maintained at low and moderate intensity no matter what we're talking about, for whoever we're talking about. The difference is if you're well conditioned, the stroke volume is higher, heart rate is lower, which is what you want, the more efficient cardiac output, okay, which will enable you to engage in higher intensities and longer durations of exercise, much more so than the person who has a lower stroke volume and a higher heart rate with the same cardiac output. Okay, that's really important to understand. And of course, that's typically due to left ventricular and arterial stiffening with age, maybe loss of the size of left ventricular, left ventricle, and the thickness of the left ventricular wall will go down as well. There's more peripheral resistance, meaning when you're younger, there's less peripheral resistance, meaning the blood flow can flow more freely through, whereas it's a little more resistant to that blood flow, affecting your ability to be able to get innervation to your muscles, to be able to get them to do what you want them to do as easily, because of that peripheral resistance that occurs with age to some extent. Okay. And that peripheral resistance can increase by or reduce by about 10 to 15%, significant as you age. Okay. A loss of pulmonary function is typically due to a loss of the elasticity of the lung tissue, not your lungs got smaller. They don't do that. Your heart can get smaller. Yep. Lungs don't. Lungs do not get smaller. Now, the loss of the usage of the capacity of your lungs due to loss of the elastic recoil of your lungs and the chest wall, possibly what we call necrosis, where you lose the actual elasticity of something. Your muscles can become more and more necrotic over time with age if you don't use them. You see it all the time. You see people like this long, elongated thing, they can't really move very well. There's the muscle there, but it's not really not able to move properly. It's not able to get proper actin myosin cross bridging. Communication doesn't really occur. They're dead nerve endings, right? The neurons are dead. Once the neurons are dead, if other neurons don't form connections with those muscle fibers die after the neuron dies. Not a good thing. Okay. Loss about 20% VO2 max by age 50, right where I am, and near 50% by age 70. I will tell you my maximal VO2 is probably 73, 74 when I was running regularly back in college as a collegiate track athlete, and now it's right around 50. Okay, so that's technically a loss of 33%. So it's even more than 20%. I'm going to attribute that mostly to a lack of staying with my efforts. I'm willing to bet I could easily get it, not easily, wrong choice of words. I could absolutely get it above 60 with regular training. I don't know if I could ever get to 70 or above. Hard to say. Won't know until you get there. Probably not going to be able to put forth that kind of consistent kind of training that would require me to get there, let alone to test the probability, which is unlikely that I would reach anywhere near my former maximal VO2 max. Remember, again, the VO2 max is your ability to perform what is your maximal rate of motion, maximal force output you can actually engage for efforts of basically some texts refer to as 8 to 12 minutes. We technically refer to it more as 10 to 12 minutes, but for the average person it can be as much as 10 to 20 minutes. Whereas lactate threshold's more 15, 20 minutes and beyond, 25, 30, 40 minutes and beyond. Then we have, with proper training and not ceasing training, you can maintain your performance within 10 to 50% of youth. Within 10 to 15%, that's pretty amazing. There's no question that I'm probably still in that category at the moment when it comes to the strength and the hypertrophy and the power output, the exception of things like vertical leap. I've lost a lot of that. However, when I was jumping before, I was 170, 175. Now I'm 225. So I think a lot of that has to do more with the weight I'm carrying around than necessarily the muscle capacity to produce force. I wouldn't know unless we could get an EMG, an actual measure of force output, but I'd also have to know what my force output was back in high school, college, when I got my maximal vertical leap to be about 34 inches. I think it's like 21 or 22 now. It's nothing worth talking about, right? But a substantial drop-off going into the 80s. Basically, 70s into the 80s. 80s and above is where the biggest drop tends to occur. But there have been plenty of people who in their 80s that are still running, they're still lifting weights, they're still moving well, and they still can do a lot of things quite well. I'm not going to be elite athletes like they were in the age of 20 and 30, but you can still move quite well if you don't ever stop performing activity. Now, that said, after talking for the most part about the primary concepts about aging, and we may talk the first, we may get one more lecture in, probably won't this week, as I mentioned, probably the next lecture next week for week 13. That one may cover a little bit more on some aspects of aging and children and adolescents, depending on how your posts go, depending on what we kind of come up with between now and then, as well as talking about, again, gender-specific differences we expect to see and some other aspects of exercise prescription. Your paper. You have a paper due, rough draft, due by 4/19, in which case you're going to do a peer review with at least one other student, and I'm going to actually direct you to one other student and then recommend you also ask one more student to do a review. And everybody will get points for doing that, of course, because I want to see the actual reviews themselves. I want to see the edited reviews. So you've actually broken down and made had questions and corrected typos and pointed things out to help the person prepare for their final paper due being 5/1. On that paper, make sure you choose a topic as soon as possible, right now, related to something we've covered in class or will be covering in class. Look at the textbook itself. And that said, something like lactate threshold training or cold temperature performance, something like that is a good starting point. However, you might want to say something like lactate threshold training for males, college age, training for a marathon or something like that. Now we're getting a lot more specific. Okay, even then you might want to even broaden even more than that, more toward marathon compared to older athletes, something more specific that you can actually define in a small enough space that 1,000 to 1,500 words, which is the expectation for the body of your paper, not including your cover page, not including your abstract, and definitely not including quotations. I want to make sure, in case I forget to say it in the future, avoid quotations as much as possible in your papers. It doesn't mean you don't ever use them, but don't quote long strings like multiple sentences. That should never happen in a paper. It just shouldn't. It's when someone makes a very succinct, clear point in a few words, and you felt it was good to quote that because it was clearly not something that you would say and not your words, and the way they put it was perfect. You quote it, that's fine. Okay, but you want to minimize usage of that whenever possible, putting this in your own words to show you learned the concept, you got it, you understood it, and then still citing the fact that you got that information from that research article or wherever you got it from. Okay, but be as specific as possible, no question about it. Now, there are many of you still are not citing properly in the APA format. Okay, and you can get mad all you want, but we still got to do it. Okay, like so many things, I understand frustration. It's easy to get frustrated with a lot of things right now. The way we're quarantined in, trying to keep you at home and can't go do things you want to do and associate with people you want to go associate with and do things you want to do. And then you got to do this whole thing. I got to cite this thing in APA format. It's got to be exact with the author and the year and the title of article and the title periodical and volume number. Yep, exactly to the point. And if I catch it, maybe I didn't catch it in a few past weeks. Well, good for you. That said, if I catch it now, you lose a point. Okay, you might lose 2 points if you didn't cite it at all. And I will say this, if you go back, you're able to go back, and if you want to put the citation in there properly, it was in there already, you didn't cite it properly, I will absolutely give you the point. Now, if you didn't ever cite anything, you're not going to get any points until you put the proper citation in there and add to your post with content to show that you actually included information from that particular article. Now, you can actually get a point for the citation. Okay, so if you got a 16, you can go to a 17. Okay, if you got a 17, you can go to an 18 with the proper citation. No question about it. But as far as you want to go back and like you didn't respond to 2 other students, or your post responses to each other were like 1 or 2 sentences, if you hadn't figured this out, if you went 1 or 2 sentences at most, in many cases I took away a point or 2 from you for not interacting to a high level with your fellow students. The whole idea is to incorporate discussions. It's a whole idea. It's not just us posting our own information. It's interacting with one another and showing you read someone's information, you have some questions about it, or some important things to mention and want some clarity on, so we're all learning from each other and growing. That's the whole point. And I won't accept this 1 sentence. That shouldn't surprise you. I think you know that. Okay, you need to be able to put more effort into those responses with your fellow students, putting more depth of content, of quality of response to each other. You can't go back and make up for past points, but you can make sure your future posts don't have that issue. You can get 1 point for your citation, and you can get half points. So if you had 3 points left and in the body of your actual post, and you want to add to the post itself, you can gain back 1.5 points. Okay, you can gain that back, which could be substantial. You're talking about 1.5 points being essentially 7%, 8% of your post grade as a whole throughout the entire course. So now you're talking about something that's going to affect your overall grade by a couple, 2 or 3%. That's pretty monstrous. Okay, something to think about. But you got to make sure you actually cite properly in the APA format. And the biggest things I will tell you, most people are not doing, you're putting the year and then you're putting a comma in there and then putting the month. I'm not sure where you're getting that. That is not APA format. The APA format for a journal article. And if you literally Google APA format OWL or Purdue, where we get our basic recognition from, or you can just simply follow this link here, and then you pick journal article, and then you see it'll show you right there. See, this is the exact citation from it right there. There it is. So I'm not quite sure where you're looking it up. I'm sorry that you're getting it somewhere that it's not accurate, but you've got to cite it properly. But go back in and change it, get the points. Okay, don't let it bother you. Don't be upset about it. It's just got to be right. Okay, it is what it is. The title of the article, most people are getting that, and a lot of you are not getting a title of periodical. I think it's because when some of you are looking at some of your research, when you're finding the articles, well, the way they cite the article is not APA format, and so you're citing it the way you see it as opposed to APA format. And we're trying to keep that consistent APA format. That's what the university, Concordia University, expects, and a lot of universities expect APA format. And of course, the title, the periodical, and volume number sometimes are not italicized. You lose a point. Issue number. If it's a journal, if it's a peer-reviewed journal, it's going to have an issue number and a volume number. It's going to. Okay. I've not seen one that. I've seen a couple here and once in a while that don't have it. But if you don't see it right away, you can actually probably Google it and find it. But in most cases, I've found, and I've seen some of you do it, when I've seen it when you didn't cite the periodical number, name, title of periodical, and you didn't cite the volume number, issue number, and I clicked on your link and found the article, I found in a place maybe you just didn't look. I found the issue number and I found the volume number and the pages. They were all there. Sometimes they're up in the upper left, okay, depending on where you find your article. And if there's a direct link to your article, then there should be this red designation for the DOI, for the digital footprint for the article. And if you're not sure how to figure out the DOI to find it, here's another link to be able to find that. That's to cite it properly. If there's no specific link to your article, then you found an actual journal, that's how you looked it up, and you couldn't find a link to find it online, then you wouldn't have the website link. You would actually just have this connection here. However, because I know you're doing this online, you should have that link right here so we can all see the article. And this is key because I want to be able to click on it and see it immediately. I want to be able to see where you're getting your information, and I want to be able to do it too, to use it for themselves for future research, let alone to know where you're going with your information. Okay. That being said, oops, clicked on the link there. Final thoughts. Start thinking about that paper draft. Let's not do 11:11. Let's do 4:19. Okay. Your dumbbell posts are getting better, but you're seeing some fluctuations. You can alleviate that, and I get. This is a course in your life, and you've got a lot going on. I understand. It is currently almost 2 a.m. and I'm doing this right now because I have a wife who has a very busy, challenging job. It's been increased challenge. She's an attorney for Wells Fargo, and with the regulations and expectations that are changing with the way people are getting the borrowing money and what they're doing with their money, it's affecting state by state what she does. So she has to do more work during the day. I'm watching my 4-year-old all day long. And if you have a 4-year-old and you have a very challenging 4-year-old, I mean, a good 4-year-old, but a challenging one, there's no time. So then I'm having dinner, and then all of a sudden it's 9, 10 o'clock before I start doing this stuff. And here I am at 2 a.m. recording a video. Now, I don't expect that you're necessarily up at 2 a.m. every single day, but I will say, or cats, dealing with cats, thank you so much, Cat, for involving that little moment for us as well. Uh, you have a lot of things that are distracting that affect you. I get it. You still got to do the work. One of the hardest things in life is being in the moment, dealing with what you've got in front of you, even though you've got other things that may or may not be more important as a whole, but right now, you got this other thing to do. That's what I expect of you. I know it's hard. Communicate with me. I'll help you out however I can. I'll direct you places to be able to make up for points that you may have lost. I want you to do well, but you've got to put in the work. Okay? And we'll talk more about that paper. And you also have a project at the very end of this course. You have an exam that's not going to be cumulative. Your third exam is like your first 2 exams. It'll be over the final 17 to chapter 17 to like 23. Okay, and then your paper, of course, and then it'll be a final project. That final project will be basically you essentially designing a program, or talk about how to design a program as a whole, based on all the things we've talked about. I'll give you more information on that. When I say design, I mean all the variables and whys, all that kind of stuff. You know, a pretty extensive little project. That's your final. That's your basically your final exam. That's what that will be. Okay, more on that later. I do hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing better than well. Sorry I can't see you 3 days a week. I'd love to be able to do that. Hope you're a little bit sorry too. Okay. Email me, call me if you have questions. We'll touch bases if we need to. Take care of yourselves. We'll talk to you again soon.